Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I am Dan Harris, joined by Mike Tagliere. You can find us on Twitter at DanHarris80 and at Mike Tagliere NFL. This episode of Fantasy Pros is brought to you by Away. Away makes first-class luggage at coach prices that allow you to charge your phone on the go. To learn more, go to awaytravel.com/fantasypros. Plus, order by the end of the day on December 15th to get free ground shipping with guaranteed free delivery by December 20th. That's only applicable if you live in the United States, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia. Tags, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Outside of the fact that you ever get like a pimple on the end of your tongue? My mom taught me when I was growing up. She said that she's like, if you get that, it means you lied about something. And for whatever reason, it's one of those things as a kid that you kind of just believe because your mom tells you that. And so now I'm kind of sitting here wondering what I lied about today.
Is there anything?
Maybe it was that I said Jared Cook was not a good play. I guess that could be considered a lie.
He did leave with a concussion, though, Tags. I mean, so you nailed that part of it. I mean, it was after 2 catches for 2 touchdowns. But, yeah, I mean, if having a quote-unquote bad fantasy call makes you a liar, then I think the vast majority of analysts would have their tongues filled with pimples, which is a disgusting thing. All right, Tags and I are recording this a couple of minutes later than we usually do because I have been flying solo all weekend, as Tags and I were just talking about. There were travel basketball games and swim lessons and needy puppies, so it's all I could do to even be here at this moment. But that is a good reminder that fantasy karma is real. I truly believe this. It sounds like a bit. I legitimately believe that this is real. I never complain to my wife about why she has to take like 3 trips a year with your friends to run marathons when we have a perfectly good treadmill in our basement. I didn't yell at the dog when he chewed through my computer cord. I didn't ground my son for a year when he bit my daughter. And you know what, Tags? I had a pretty darn good fantasy day. I mean, there were, a lot of injuries that went around, a lot of kind of dud performances, but I mean, in the leagues I made the playoffs, I'm moving on in all of them, and I attribute it to good fantasy karma. So if you're out there and you're feeling like kind of just being an a-hole next Sunday or something like that, just be nice. Fantasy gods really do love it. That's not a bit. I legitimately try to be a nicer person when I want good things to happen in fantasy, which is pathetic on my part and not really something that I'm proud of, but I'm telling you it works. So go to the grocery store next week, like at halftime of the early games. You'll feel a lot better about yourself. Anyway, Tags, let's focus up today. Just 2 weeks left. We are only concerned about that in terms of going forward. I'm still going to ask you for your biggest winner and your loser, but we are going to skip the what's your problem, man, because our rest of season rankings, to the extent they diverge, it really doesn't matter. There's 2 weeks left at this point. That's all we care about. So let's just start us off with your winner and loser, and then we will jump into the games.
I'll give my biggest winner would be Raheem Mostert, somebody that we were worried about it being a 1-week sample size and not knowing what to expect with Matt Breida coming back and all 3 running backs active, with Tevin Coleman, Matt Breida and him, and he shined and he did it again. So it's like, going into weeks 15 and 16, I think you could play him with confidence as that RB3 in your lineup, maybe even something more than that, considering the matchups, but he's definitely a winner. And the loser, it's going to be a co-award for me. It's going to be his teammate, Tevin Coleman, who is now in the doghouse and basically irrelevant. I think he's droppable in fantasy leagues because even if there's an injury in front of him, it's not like he was producing with Matt Breida out of the lineup. So I think he's droppable at this point. The co-loser here is Sony Michel. He's someone that I was willing to kind of trade for in some leagues and say, okay, if I make it to the playoffs, I feel like he's going to be an asset. But, wow. I mean, I really don't understand what New England was doing in this game. Just because it's like, if you look at what the Chiefs have done in terms of like on defense, they've been really good against perimeter wide receivers. It made sense to attack the slot, which is why we've seen Edelman have a big game, but you run the ball against them. I don't know why Bill Belichick decided to have Tom Brady continually drop back and look terrible for the majority of the game, and not give, I know Sony Michel only finished with 8 yards on 5 carries, but still you have to establish the run a little bit. So Sony Michel, I don't, they have matchups with the Bengals and the Bills over the final 2 weeks of the fantasy season, but I mean, if you got through this week somehow magically, which is possible with all the injuries, do you trust him next week? It's the Bengals, I believe, next week, and then the Bills in week 16. So would you trust him next week against the Bengals? I mean, that's where I'm at. It's really tough.
Well, maybe because they were down, obviously, in this game for almost the entire thing. Part of the other big thing is that in addition to the fact that Michel did absolutely nothing, he did only see the 5 carries when Rex Burkhead saw 7 and James White saw 6. Now, perhaps it's all because they were essentially in that mode where they needed the pass catching back in there, but that's certainly something that makes you worried. If you're in the playoffs and you advanced with Sony Michel on your team, then you frankly should just sit back and put your feet up because you're an amazing fantasy manager. And Tags and I are both extremely proud of you. Let's focus on San Francisco for a second. So, look, here's the deal. Mostert, monster day, 10 carries, 69 yards with the touchdown, 2 catches on 2 targets for 40 yards and the touchdown. Matt Breida was involved, but he had just 7 touches. Tevin Coleman, as you said, non-existent. I agree. You stole my thunder. Tevin Coleman certainly is droppable at this point. But look, Mostert has the huge performance, but it's still just 12 touches here. I mean, you kind of tempered your, you didn't go crazy. You weren't like reliable RB2. He was more of like the RB3. They've got the Falcons and the Rams, but he is somebody who you're starting. But I'm inclined to agree with you. This is not a guy who you're like, oh, great, I'm starting him over a guy who I feel like has been a quasi-reliable RB2, generally speaking, right? He's still more in that RB3 or flex situation, right?
Yeah, you're still not starting him over guys like maybe like a David Montgomery or a Joe Mixon, guys that are locked into, they're basically getting 18 touches a week, and you can't guarantee that for Mostert, but we also have to remember this was a really tough matchup. I didn't really want to start Mostert if I didn't have to this week because there were a lot of variables that went into it, but knowing that he did perform against the Saints, which is arguably the toughest matchup in the NFL for running backs, he's definitely gained a lot of confidence, and you're going to put him in the territory with guys like, you're going to be starting ahead of guys like Kareem Hunt, probably ahead of guys like Austin Eckler, which might be a mistake, but yeah, I mean, that's the conversation that he's in, right, with guys like Austin Eckler in that high-end RB3 range, most likely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm in a league, Tags, about a lot of sharp guys. It's worth a lot of jelly beans, and nobody picked up Mostert this week, who were still in the playoffs, because we were all nobody was willing to start him this week. If you're made the playoffs in these leagues, everybody feels generally pretty confident that you're going to do. And frankly, look, we are very deep in running back, but part of my thought was it's really difficult to see a scenario where suddenly there's one guy who you want and it's going to be Mostert. I get how good he looked, but with Breida coming back, this situation seemed to me against the Saints. You weren't going to start him this week, of course. It seemed unlikely, you know what I mean, to develop into a now look how well he did in this really tough matchup. Now you got to think about picking him up, but certainly to the extent anybody has remaining fab, he's going to go for a lot, and he should. He's a guy who you can plug in to start next week. All right, we are going to get into the games here, but before we get into it, I want to talk about one of our sponsors, Manscaped, the #1 option for men's below-the-belt grooming. So, I mean, we try to look our best everywhere, and even though we don't talk about it all that much, we all take care of ourselves below the belt. You don't need to hide it. Everybody knows. Now, the thing is, that is a delicate area. You have to be very careful down there. I have told you about Manscaped before, and I've given you a cautionary tale about my old college roommate who I called Skippy. Now, Skippy apparently listens to this podcast. He emailed me after he heard that episode, and he was not particularly happy that I shared his tale of woe with more than 100,000 listeners. I used a fake name. I don't know what more he wants, but he wasn't very kind in that email, so I'm just going to tell his story again because it's precisely why you need to go to manscaped.com and get their Perfect Package 2.0. Back in college, I was roommates with Skippy and a couple of other guys, and Skippy was one of these guys who took great pride in his looks, took forever to get ready to go out, and one day we're all waiting for Skippy to get out of the bathroom so we can head to the bar, and we hear this loud scream from upstairs, and we rush up, and Skip tells us just to go out without him, he's fine. And look, he is weird. A random scream from a bathroom is weird, but he's Skippy, so we're just like, okay, who the heck knows? Maybe he dropped his favorite, like, comb down the toilet or something. But the next day, Skippy's girlfriend was over, and she was not shy. She spilled the beans. He was trimming himself down below the belt, and he had himself a little accident. Now, Skippy's story is not unique. It unfortunately happens to guys everywhere all the time, and it's exactly why Manscaped has redesigned the electric trimmer. Their Lawnmower 2.0 has proprietary advanced skin-safe technology so you can avoid following in Skippy's footsteps. It is even waterproof so you can use it in the shower. Now, the Lawnmower 2.0 comes inside Manscaped's Perfect Package 2.0, which is the perfect gift for the holiday season. It's literally everything you need to keep trimmed, cut-free, and smelling nice down there. With the Perfect Package 2.0, you not only get the Lawnmower 2.0, but you also get the Crop Preserver, an anti-chafing ball deodorant and moisturizer, as well as anti-chafing performance boxer briefs, and the Crop Reviver, which along with the Crop Preserver keeps your balls perfectly fresh. The Manscaped Perfect Package 2.0 is the perfect gift this holiday season, and you can get 20% off plus free shipping with the code FantasyPros over at Manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code FantasyPros at Manscaped.com. All right, Tags, let's start with Thursday here. Your Bears, 31. The Cowboys, 24. Look, Mitchell Trubisky, I don't know, where he was the first half of the season, but impressive again. Accounts for 4 touchdowns, 3 passing, and 1 rushing. Dave Montgomery, solid, 20 for 86. Allen Robinson scores his 2 touchdowns. He's been a beast. But let's talk about Anthony Miller. Again, we've touched on him before. Only 4 targets here, 3 catches, 42 yards. Not great. He does find the end zone, though. So Week 12 against the Giants, 6 for 77. Week 13 against the Lions, 9 catches for 140. Now Week 14 against the Cowboys, 4 catches, 42, and a touchdown. It's probably contingent on Taylor Gabriel continuing to be out, but assuming that he is, and assuming that you're in need of a wide receiver, can you start him with the Packers and the Chiefs on tap in your fantasy playoffs?
The Packers, no. Tramon Williams has been really good in the slot for them. It's not a matchup that you really want to target with a receiver that, Anthony Miller, I think there's 5 games this year where he's seen 7 or more targets, but every other game it's been, I think 4 or less targets. So it's very like hit or miss with him. Mitch Trubisky he did struggle against Green Bay in the first game of the season. Miller was coming off the injury in the preseason for that one. So he's probably going to be labeled as somewhat of a low end wide receiver for me, going into this week. I know that there's like a lot of buzz around him, but I am expecting Taylor Gabriel to come back from his concussion this week. Allen Robinson should see tons of targets because Green Bay is a matchup where you kind of target the perimeter, and Miller's not playing many of his snaps at all there. So, I'm not going to be particularly high on him this week, but against the Chiefs in week 16, if you want to hang on to him, I believe he'll have more appeal in that matchup.
Yeah, wide receiver 4 is exactly where I'm going to have him ranked coming into next week. I mean, this has been good to see. I like Miller a lot. I like his talent. He's got the occasional dropsies that kind of bug you a little bit, but he's talented. And again, look, that first matchup with the Packers, if I recall, he barely played, didn't he? I mean, I know he was coming off the injury, as you mentioned, but I remember, Cohen ran all those snaps out of the slot there. So, I think Miller's, I like him. I think I can certainly see a scenario where you're starting him in the playoffs, but you've really got to be wide receiver needy. I wouldn't get all overly excited about the last 3 games, other than I think it puts him in the range, as you said, of those guys who you can start if you really essentially need to. Again, a wide receiver 4 is a guy that a lot of playoff teams are still going to need to start. You're in a 3 wide receiver league. You might be needy at that final position, but he's certainly not a guy who I'm overly excited about, at least not in next week's matchup. For the Cowboys, it's not overly pretty, but those who you need to score fantasy points do so. Dak throws for 334 yards in the score. Zeke totals 93 total yards, 2 scores. Michael Gallup comes through with 6 for 109. Amari Cooper, man, he looks real gimpy out there, but he's getting it done in the end. 6 for 83 plus a touchdown. Are you still starting all your relevant Cowboys against the Rams and the Eagles for the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the Rams handle Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup, because if they stick Jalen Ramsey on Cooper, then they're going to deal with Troy Hill on Michael Gallup, and it's an ongoing thing. And I think that's why you see teams like the Cowboys, teams like the Falcons spending draft equity on guys like Calvin Ridley and Michael Gallup, because they're guys that can walk in and kind of contribute. Like they almost force the opponent into a tough spot, because it's very rare that a team has 2 shutdown cornerbacks in the roster. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle that. But yes, you're starting Cooper anytime you can, and that Gallup's not going to see the number 1 corner, and he's seen at least 6 targets in all but 1 game this year, so he's like a must start. He's probably one of the better number 2 fantasy wide receivers in football in terms of like number 2 on his team. So I would say that he's a top 30 wide receiver, even in the tough matchup next week against the Rams. I wanted to tell a quick story, a personal story. I was at that game, and it was probably the best game that I could have gone to as a Bears fan this year. Nagy called a good game. Trubisky called a good game. But I wanted to give a shout out to this little dude that was sitting next to me. He has no idea that I do this podcast or anything like that. He's like 13 years old, and I'm talking to him throughout the game. He's a Cowboys fan. And once the Bears got up, and he's just like, oh no, but he was really good, like in spirit about it. And I told him, I'm like, I'm rooting for Cooper right now, man. Like, the Bears are going to win, and that's fine, but I want Amari to do some work. Okay. Can we like celebrate that? So him and I were celebrating over an Amari Cooper touchdown. So, me and this teenage Cowboys fan, if you do listen to this show, obviously now you know.
That story, I love it. I realize it's like a small little anecdote and everything like that, but I love things like that, especially with little kids. My son is 6. He gets crazy excited at football games. When we went to the Titans-Jets game a couple of years ago, there was a great Titans fan who was, kind of throwing him some love there, even though the Jets are terrible as they always were, and he really loved it. So that's a great story, Tags. Way to put. I mean, to be fair, you love Amari Cooper, so you were really rooting for him for your own personal gain. But I love that we could sort of spin that into being like, look at you, Tags, bringing sports together. I love it, but I guess we all really know what you're about. All right, let's move on here to the Packers 20, Redskins 15. Aaron Jones, the big day here, 192 total yards with the score. Nobody else really does anything. Rodgers just 195 yards passing and a touchdown. Devontae Adams held to just 41 yards. Jamal Williams only 24 yards. Tags, I'm not really sure we're doing anything with this game. You've got the Bears and the Vikings coming up. You're still starting Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams each week. You're starting Aaron Rodgers most weeks. I assume it's not the greatest matchups. It's not the worst, but I assume you're still starting him. Probably not Jamal Williams, only if you're desperate. Any disagreement on that or anything to add as to what you're doing with your Packers in these next two matchups?
Yeah, Jamal Williams is a little bit worrisome. He's someone that popped up on the injury report this week. They've been talking about Aaron Jones getting the ball more, so I don't know if I'd necessarily say that he's a must start every single week. He's more in that that territory where it's like you put the Matt Breidas and the Tevin Coleman's typically, in that low end RB3, high end RB4. His role seems to have diminished in the passing game because he only sees one target in this game. Aaron Jones has 7. And again, that's something they've been talking about. So you're still starting Aaron Jones, obviously. Aaron Rodgers is an interesting one, to try and figure out, because this might be the worst 10-3 team I've ever seen in terms of what they do. They just barely beat a bottom of the barrel team in the Washington Redskins. It's almost like the Packers refuse to keep their foot on the throttle this year. And I think that's going to be a mistake by Matt LaFleur. I mean, I don't know if it's just struggling to get drives put together, or if it's just lackadaisical play calling, but it's almost like they take a lead and they want to sit on it and they don't do anything to stomp an opponent to give that offense that confidence they need going into the playoffs, because you're going to need to put up some points to hang with these teams. We've seen the 49ers, we've seen the Saints go at it today, and I mean they need to have Aaron Rodgers featured more. It's simple. I thought this would be a game where they could just kind of build those spirits going into two tough divisional matchups with the Bears and the Vikings, but they didn't. They just sat on the lead, and it's been an ongoing thing. Aaron Rodgers has been outside the top 20 fantasy quarterbacks more than he's been inside the top 10. So this offense is really limiting, but you can't sit him because he's Aaron frickin' Rodgers, and he has thrown, I've already started researching this game. He's already thrown 10 passing touchdowns against the Bears in the last 3 games at Lambeau Field. So he's done well against them at home.
Yeah. And again, what was that game, Tags? Who was he? Was it the Raiders where he threw 6 touchdown passes or something like that? Right. And everybody was kind of like, I don't really know if you start him. And against the Giants, again, he had that huge day. So I agree. If you own Rodgers anyway, if you're in a 2-quarterback league, you're obviously starting him. And if you're in a 1-quarterback league and you've made it this far with Aaron Rodgers, you're probably not going to the waiver wire at this point, regardless. But either way, that is why you continue to start him. And yeah, I don't think you can start Jamal Williams, really under any circumstances. I think when you've got guys like Mostert who are out there, Patrick Laird, who we'll talk about a little bit later, I really think Williams at this point, regardless of his performance right now, kind of slips to the back of that.
Hey, Dan, real quick before we move on, I just want to ask you, as one of the best rankers, so if you guys don't know, Dan Harris has been killing it in the rankings this year. He's top 10 continually. He's always up there. What are you overall right now?
Maybe 8th. Let's go 8th.
That's legit, right? So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to put you on the spot right now.
Oh, boy.
Aaron Rodgers next week. Let's pretend someone has Rodgers, okay? And they also are able to grab Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill is at home next week against the Houston Texans, the team that we just saw Drew Lock completely tear to shreds. Would you play Ryan Tannehill over Aaron Rodgers next week?
All right, so I'm not going to make my call just yet. I'm going to weasel out of it, but my guess, here's what I'm going to say. My guess is there's going to be less than 2 spots between them one way or another, okay? I mean, I think this is and look, I told you about this a couple of weeks ago about when I had Kyler Murray and Ryan Tannehill in a 2-quarterback league, and I was thinking of dishing Murray. I tried, I couldn't, but I started Tannehill today, and that's sort of what you need to be thinking. I'm not all that concerned about it. Probably before this past game, I would have said that I'm buying Houston's secondary a little bit more lately. They obviously didn't look quite as good today, so I'm a little more bullish on Tannehill than I otherwise would be. But I would say probably right now, gun to my head, I'd probably still start Aaron Rodgers because you put it so succinctly. He's Aaron freaking Rodgers. It's very hard not to start him. But I do think that it's going to be one of these things where when I run my projections and I do my rankings, they're going to be right next to each other. So I'm going to hold off on that. But that is the range. And, but again, you own Rodgers, I'm probably starting Aaron Rodgers. Is how I probably go. On the other side, Darius Geis injures his knee here after 5 pretty good-looking carries. It sounds like an MCL sprain, so I doubt you're going to see him next week. Adrian Peterson sees 20 carries for 76 yards and a touchdown. Look, the Eagles are a tough matchup. The Giants aren't quite as easy as they used to be. They've been better against the run over the past few weeks. So can Adrian Peterson, assuming that Geis is out, which I think is a fair assumption, can Adrian Peterson be a guy who is a significant factor in the fantasy playoffs?
No, I'm not playing Peterson.
I think we're both there. If you're against the Eagles, who have a great run defense, you're not starting Adrian Peterson. Against the Giants, they are not. Don't look at their season-long numbers. They've been better, whether or not it's the addition of Leonard Williams, whether it's causation or correlation, but they've certainly been better as of late. But he is a guy who could start there, and especially, 20 carries. The Redskins are just basically looking to run out the rest of the season, so I do like that they're going to continue to pound the ball. I will note that Terry McLaurin goes for 57 yards and a touchdown.
That touchdown was ridiculous.
You've talked about him a million times. I am not starting him with Dwayne Haskins. I'm sure Tags would be a little more willing to trust him if he absolutely had to. But for me, I'd rather watch the touchdowns from afar and be happy for the guy and not have to worry about watching Dwayne Haskins overthrow him constantly. Vikings 20, Lions 7. Still no Adam Thielen here. The Vikings really don't need to do all that much on offense. Kirk Cousins just 242 passing yards and a touchdown to B.C. Johnson. Stephon Diggs bounces back here with 6 catches for 92 yards. But the running backs here, there was the question about Cook. So he goes 18 for 62 and a score, plus 2 catches for 13 yards. Alexander Mattison, 14 carries for 46 yards, plus 2 catches for 18 yards. So is this just a big lead here, and it's his first game back off the injury, or do you think that Madison is going to carve out this closer to 50-50 touch role here against the Chargers and the Packers going forward?
This is a situation where it's like, why put our lead running back at risk, coming off, because he apparently was dealing with that injury more than just last week. He didn't just suffer it last week. It's something that he's been trying to play through. But knowing that they removed him off the injury report altogether, it made me feel better about him. And getting 20 touches, that's not a low amount. But again, this game was far out of reach. Dalvin Cook he's going to be considered a top 6 running back for me for the remainder of the season. The Chargers aren't a team that I don't think they'll necessarily blow out, but at the same time, the way that you move the ball against the Chargers has been on the ground. So, there's nothing really to worry about here with Cook. I think Madison's still a must-own. Like, he should not be dropped, even if, obviously, Cook seems fine health-wise, but do not drop Alexander Madison.
And the Lions, it's nice to see Kenny Galladay find the end zone here. 6 catches, 58 yards, and a touchdown. This was all late. The game was over for pretty much the entire game. Is it fair to say, Tags, that Galladay is the only player on the Lions that you can start against the Bucs and the Broncos?
The Bucs, I might feel confident starting Jones. The Broncos, I don't even know if I feel confident starting any of them. Blau's going to be under a lot of pressure in that game. I don't think Stafford's coming back. I mean, it makes absolutely zero sense for him to come back at this point. But Galladay and Jones should be on the radar absolutely against Tampa Bay. I mean, anybody. We saw the Colts that were down to literally third string wide receivers put up some numbers against them today. Yeah, you start wide receivers against the Colts if you can help it, and or against the Bucs if you can help it. And I mean, Marvin Jones still saw 7 targets, Galladay 8 targets. Bo Scarborough's not going to do anything on the ground against Tampa Bay. So yeah, I think they're both going to be starts next week.
I mean, I will say the one thing about Scarborough is, look, a guy who's basically getting 19 to 22 touches a week, even though he does it all on the ground. He doesn't do anything in the passing game. It's worth something. I mean, you can throw him out there if you're absolutely necessary. Obviously, the Bucs are about the worst matchup that you can possibly have for any sort of running back. All right, Tags, Falcons 40, Panthers 20. Tags, I didn't see when Calvin Ridley left the game. It's just stomach pain. Was he sick, or did he get injured in his abdomen? Do you have any details on this?
I'm guessing it's cramps or something like that. I haven't heard anything severe about it, and I haven't seen any headlines pop up. So I'm assuming that he's going to be fine.
All right, so that's what I was assuming too. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything. Let's assume he had some bad pizza and he's going to be fine next week. He catches all 5 of his targets for 76 yards on the score. He continues to produce week in and week out, which is great to see. Devonta Freeman and Brian Hill both run well here. First time running backs run well for the Falcons. Obviously, it's a great matchup, and they both find the end zone. Julio Jones, just 66 yards, but at least he's out there. Matt Ryan, 313 yards passing and 2 touchdowns. I'm not sure there's all that much to say with this game here, Tags. Does anyone's value move significantly at all from this game?
Not really. I mean, he's the biggest disappointment of the group. I mean, he sees 6 targets, 32 yards against the Panthers. The Panthers coming into this game, by the way, had allowed the most yards per target to tight ends, even more than the Cardinals. So it was a great matchup, and it's disappointing to see him finish so low. I don't know if it's just coming off the injury. Maybe he's not quite 100%. Now going into the matchup with the 49ers, I'm pretty sure that's who they play in week 15. Yeah, that's a brutal matchup. I mean, I understand what the Saints just did against them, and this defense, like Richard Sherman was in and out of the lineup all day, and the 49ers, like in terms of their sack rate, it was going to fall. Like they bring pressure, but the sack rate was like much higher than it probably should have been over the first 10 weeks. And we're starting to see them come back down to earth a little bit, kind of like we are with the Patriots. These teams are going to do that, but Matt Ryan's continually been under pressure this year, and that offensive line is not built to withstand the pass rush there. I don't really want to say that I move anybody up or down. I mean, Hooper, it might worry me a little bit. Like I'm going to bring him down a notch. Maybe he's not in that elite tier if he's still working through that, especially with that tough matchup coming up against the 49ers. So, yeah, it's unfortunate that this team is going into such a tough matchup.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent there is any remotely silver lining for the Falcons offense going in, it's that, I mean, the 49ers, they got pretty beat up today on defense. I mean, you mentioned Richard Sherman. He was battling the hamstring injury. Dee Ford had the hamstring injury. Williams left with a concussion. I mean, they may be seriously down next week, so that could make the matchup not quite as bad. And again, as the Saints showed today, although you don't really want to read too much into Drew Brees at home and what he's able to do, you can certainly have success against them. But I agree, nothing really changes for me here. I mean, Hooper is a really tough, you want to throw him right back in your lineup. Certainly a disappointment. But he is someone who, again, with the wasteland that is tight end, it's really hard to own Austin Hooper, have survived this week, and then be like, nah, I'm done with him. Let's move on to the Panthers here. Production from the usual suspects. Christian McCaffrey, 135 total yards. DJ Moore, 4 catches for 81 yards. Ian Thomas steps up as expected without Greg Olsen. He sees 10 targets, 5 catches for 57 yards. Curtis Samuel held in check a little bit, just 42 total yards. They've got the Seahawks and the Colts on deck. Same thing as I said with the Falcons tag. Is this game moving the needle on any of these players here?
Ian Thomas was someone I really did want to like this week, and I'm really mad because one of their coaches came out and said it was going to be a timeshare tight end, that not one of them is going to just fill that Greg Olsen role. So I moved Ian Thomas down in my rankings, which really ticks me off because I had him all the way up at tight end 10, and then I ended up moving him down to like tight end 18 or something like that. So that's a little disappointing. I don't really think I move anybody because Curtis Samuel was someone that I've already been worried about just because Kyle Allen can't throw the deep ball. DJ Moore targets dip a little bit in this game, but no, I don't. I'm not really moving anybody like significantly. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey's an every week start. He catches 11 passes here, but my worry here is that the Panthers are heading towards obviously the offseason. They know that they're not going anywhere this year. Do they start resting McCaffrey because they have nothing to play for? Do they stop giving him, those 20 plus opportunity games and start involving some other players? Like, do you think that's a possibility with the Panthers down the stretch?
Did they do it last year?
Week 17 they did. Week 17 they only let him play one series, and then they put him on the bench.
Yeah, I think that I would probably. I mean, it's different coaching staff now, of course, obviously different head coach. But I would expect kind of the same thing here. I think this is just what they do, man. And McCaffrey's a beast. I would probably look to hold him down a little bit just to protect him. But it doesn't seem like that's what they're going to do. So if you own McCaffrey, I mean, there's nothing you can do, obviously. There's no trade deadlines at this point. You're obviously starting him. But if I were, I still feel pretty confident. I think if you play into Week 17, maybe then. But other than that, I think you're pretty good to go. Before we keep going, let's talk about Away. Now, I spoke to you about Away several weeks ago. Tags had just gotten his carry-on bag. I was waiting for mine, and Tags was effusive in his praise. I got mine a few days later, and if anything, I can say that Tags undersold this thing. I would slowly walk you through each of the features on my bag right now as I'm looking at it, but I can't because I don't have it with me because my wife stole it and took it with her on her weekend trip that I mentioned on the top of the show. Away does not make suitcases, guys. They make like little mini hotels on wheels. The suitcases are affordable, high quality, and they charge your phone. You can get it in a variety of colors and 4 sizes, the carry-on, the bigger carry-on, the medium, or the large. And the carry-on bags have 2 USB ports and a high-capacity battery, so you can charge both your phone and your iPad or your Apple Watch and your son's Nintendo Switch. It's brilliant. It's ultra durable and yet lightweight. It's got 4 360-degree spinner wheels that will not get stuck or break. It's got a combination lock built in. There's free shipping, and it comes with a lifetime warranty. Legitimately, it's life-changing for travel. And now is really the time to check out Away because traveling during the holidays can be crazy, but getting Away can make every trip a lot more seamless. To learn more, go to awaytravel.com/fantasypros. Plus, order by the end of the day on December 15th to get free ground shipping with guaranteed free delivery by December 20th, so long as you live in the United States or Europe or England or Canada or Australia. For additional last-minute holiday shipping details, check out the Away website. Again, that's awaytravel.com/fantasypros. All right, Tags, let's get back into the games here. 49ers 48, Saints 46. Now, I personally had the 49ers getting the 2.5 points, which is nice, but I also had the under, so I missed a little bit on that one. Two really, really tough defenses, and yet points aplenty. So let's hit some of the high points. Jimmy Garoppolo throws for 349 yards and 4 touchdowns. Emmanuel Sanders, 9 targets, 7 catches, 157 yards. George Kittle finds the end zone with 67 yards. Deebo Samuel goes for 76 yards. We've already broken down the running backs here. Anything here on the, the passing game for the 49ers?
Yeah, Emmanuel Sanders, I liked him a lot this week. He's one of the guys that I really hit on, and he's one of those guys that I told Bobby is, like when you submit your rankings and you have, are you sure you want to do this, you idiot?
Yes.
Moments. I had that with Emmanuel Sanders because I had him at like wide receiver 22 or wide receiver 23, and I feel like people were undervaluing him because they were worried about the rib injury, but he played a full complement of snaps against the Ravens the prior week, and the Saints you just don't run the ball against. So I really did like Sanders. I didn't know this would happen, but him and Deebo Samuel are clearly balling out. Jimmy Garoppolo has played much better as of late, and these guys are doing work after the catch. So I think that they're turning into every week starts at this point. Especially knowing that the 49ers are throwing the ball a lot more, because once they did get Emmanuel Sanders in the roster and they got Deebo Samuel back into the offense in a full-time role, in George Kittle in the offense, it seems like they're slowly transitioning into a more balanced attack, whereas at the beginning of the year it was nonstop running the ball. Like there was a stat I had, it was a few weeks ago, like before they started passing the ball a lot, and it was that their running backs had totaled at least like 33 touches in like every single game. It was like the first 8 or 9 games they touched the ball at least 33 times, which is just like mind-blowing. That stuff doesn't happen. But they're transitioning into more of a balanced attack, and their defense is starting to allow a little bit more production. So I kind of think that it's at the point now where you kind of have to start Deebo Samuel and Emmanuel Sanders.
Yeah, that's what I really want to ask. I mean, I feel like if you own Emmanuel Sanders, you've had, mostly a tough few weeks, but to the extent he's out there, you're going to start him. But I was going to ask whether Samuel, is he at this point essentially a wide receiver 3 and you start him? I mean, they've got the Falcons and the Rams. Is he a starter in both those matchups? Just don't think about it if you're in 3 wide receiver leagues. He's in your lineup.
The Falcons 100% yes. You're playing against the Falcons. And then against the Rams, it's not really a bad matchup either, because again, you're forcing the Rams to choose what they're going to do with Jalen Ramsey. And if there's anyone that he's going to shadow, it's going to be Emmanuel Sanders. But there's still production to be had. So yeah, I do think that he's going to be in like that low end wide receiver 3 territory.
All right, let's move on to the Saints here. Drew Brees, incredible 5 throw passing touchdowns. He rushes for 349 yards passing. Michael Thomas, his usual dominant self. We mentioned Jared Cook already. 2 early touchdowns. He leaves with a concussion. Other touchdowns go to Traquan Smith and Josh Hill. But let's talk about Alvin Kamara here, Tags. I mean, you and I have both been like, you got to throw him out there. Obviously, there's going to be this boom game. 13 for 25 on the ground, 4 catches for 18 yards in a game where they scored 46 points here. So he loses a fumble. Latavius Murray runs much better. Tags, this is a crazy question I'm going to ask. I know what your answer is going to be, but if you survived with Alvin Kamara on your team, is he still a must start against the Colts and the Titans going forward?
Yes, you still start Alvin Kamara. Someone asked me earlier today whether or not it was like the scheme or what was going on with him, was the offensive line, and it did hurt. Losing Max Unger this offseason, their center, that obviously it was a blow to the offense for sure. But Alvin Kamara looks fine. In this game, he didn't look as stellar, but I go back and rewatch these games, so I'll watch this one again. There was so much stuff going on in this game. It was hard to keep up, to be honest. But Kamara has looked generally fine throughout the entire season. It's just been the touchdowns that he's been lacking in. I'm not worried about him. I'm really not. And the Colts, with that zone scheme, you're going to see a lot of dump downs to him in that matchup, and they use him in the passing game a lot more than Latavius Murray. So I'm not really worried about it. No, I'm going to start him. I'm going to rank him as a top 12 running back, and we're going to keep moving.
Okay. Browns 27, Bengals 19. Pretty disappointing game overall here for the Browns. Mayfield scores the rushing touchdown, but just 192 yards and 2 touchdowns. Kareem Hunt, total 68 yards on the score. Nick Chubb rushes for 106 yards. Jarvis Landry, 76 yards. But Tags, Odell Beckham apparently has been dealing with a hernia. Just 5 targets, 2 catches, 39 yards. Tags, you have been the biggest Odell Beckham Jr. sort of everything's fine. He's going to have these matchups. He's going to dominate. Arizona is up next. It's another soft matchup overall. Are you still starting Odell Beckham Jr. if you own him and survived in your playoffs?
Yeah. I mean, I've kind of just accepted the fact that he's just not very good this year, but at the same time, his fantasy floor has been better than some people make it out to be. He's still a top 30 fantasy wide receiver despite not living up to expectations. That's really where everything comes in. You have to understand the expectations are what makes him a bust. And he absolutely has been a massive bust, because when you draft wide receivers in the top 2 rounds, those are guys that if they're healthy, they're producing. They're getting targets, they're producing. He has not been that guy, but he has offered a fantasy floor. It's been a little lesser than someone like Devontae Parker, but it's still he's still an every week start. And going into a matchup with Arizona, a team that just allowed Deontay Johnson to get back on the fantasy map with 60 yards and a touchdown, I'm going to play him, and I'm going to understand that it's not what I expected him to be. But if you just dial back expectations and say he's a wide receiver 3, if you kind of treat him like someone like maybe like a Tyler Boyd, you just have to understand that. I mean, just think about what Tyler Lockett, what his owners feel like. They're still starting him, right? He hasn't performed in a month, but you do it because you understand the talent level, and especially in a matchup against Arizona, you play him.
So I'm going to give fantasy owners, not that they need my permission to do anything, but I'm going to give them the permission to bench him next week against the Cardinals if they want to. In other words, I don't think you need to look at Odell Beckham Jr. anymore and say, this is Odell Beckham. I have to start him. There's really nothing I can do about it. He's playing. I'm starting him. Look, I own him and Tyler Boyd, oddly enough, in a league where I have a bye and I'm going into next week. And I have not really looked to try to swap them in or out for a guy who plays the matchups, because I do think that it's just kind of at that point where you do kind of trust him. In that situation, yeah, the way you described it, Tags, you're looking at Beckham essentially like a wide receiver 3, a guy he's got the upside, but there's going to be games that are just sort of like this, 2 for 39. But in the end, yeah, I'm not saying he's a must bench. I'm sort of with you, at least, because it sounds like what you're saying is, look, he's a guy who, if you own him, unless you have a strong sort of wide receiving group, you probably don't have 3 wide receivers who you like better than Beckham, or who you have any more faith are going to put up big numbers than Beckham. So I think you and I are kind of right in line in terms of how we're viewing him. But I do want to say, do not be a slave to the name at this point. You know what I mean? You've got to, at some point, especially if it's week 15, there's 2 weeks left, I think you got to do whatever you got to do at this point. But for me, look, I agree to the extent wide receiver 3 territory, and you hope for the big game. But obviously, now that you know that he's dealing with the injury, it's a little, my expectations, I kind of thought there would be a big game coming in this one. I thought there'd be a big game next week. I'm not really nearly as confident about next week, but I'm still throwing him out there for the most part. Let's go to the other side. The Bengals. Auden Tate here leaves with a knee injury, but it's all Joe Mixon. 23 carries, 146 yards, and a score on the ground, plus 3 catches for 40 yards in the air. Tyler Boyd, we just talked about, he chips in 5 for 75, plus 1 rushing attempt for 7 yards. You're starting Mixon and likely Boyd against the Pats and the Dolphins coming up, I assume, and other than that, you're avoiding all Bengals. Is that fair?
Against the Dolphins, yes. Against the Patriots, not necessarily. It just depends on who you're trying to debate them over, because the Patriots, it's going to go back to the idea that the Patriots were an elite defense, and we've seen them take a step back over the last couple of weeks. But once they go up against the Bengals, it's gonna be like, oh, that's the Patriots team that was dominating on defense, because Andy Dalton, he looked terrible today. He was a guy that was just holding onto the ball too long, taking sacks and losing seemingly Auden Tate. He's not going to have AJ Green. I know John Ross came back to the offense, but he's still working his way back in. The Patriots have actually done really, really well against slot receivers, so I don't think it's a good matchup for Tyler Boyd either. I don't think he's a must play at all, but Mixon, you're kind of starting at this point. They're giving him 20 plus touches no matter what is going on in the game, so you kind of have to play him. I wouldn't expect massive results against the Patriots, but you definitely trot him out there.
Well, I hope to get a lot of tweets coming into next Sunday when you ask me how my team with both Odell Beckham Jr. and Tyler Boyd is doing, because I have a feeling it's not going to be very good.
I played Beckham over Boyd for that, for what it's worth.
No, Tags. That's my number 1 and my number 2 wide receiver. We're not even going to talk about. But hey, I earned a bye because, fantasy football. Who the heck knows? So, all right, before we get into the rest of the games, a reminder that we are on Instagram. Just look for us at Fantasy Pros, where you can see all of our great content with our articles, some videos, all of that. Again, that's at Fantasy Pros on Instagram. All right, Tags, Bucks 38, Colts 35. Kind of a lot to unpack here for the Bucks. Let's start first with Jameis Winston before we get into Evans, who leaves with a hamstring injury. Winston has the huge game, 456 yards passing, 4 passing touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown. He obviously throws 3 interceptions because that is Jameis Winston. Now, he has a very small fracture in his thumb. That caused him to leave the game briefly, but he apparently loosened up and was okay. It sounds as if right now, Tags, that he's going to be okay next week against the Lions. So for the moment, let's just put a pin in that and instead talk about Evans, who scores a touchdown on a 61-yard catch, but he injured his hamstring during that. It does not sound good, Tags. He's all but ruled out already for next week. I would probably assume that he's out for week 16 too, but for now, you're almost certainly looking at him out against the Lions. So you know you're starting Chris Godwin regardless. But does Evans' injury make someone like O.J. Howard, who had 4 catches for 73 yards, or Brashad Perryman, who had 3 catches for 70 yards and a touchdown, somebody who you might want to think about starting in that matchup?
Yeah, O.J. Howard is definitely someone that's on the radar. He's been playing a lot of snaps over the last couple weeks. He's out of that doghouse. He ends up with 4 catches for 73 yards in this game. He has too much talent to leave on the sidelines, and if Mike Evans is out of the lineup, that clears up 8 to 12 to 15 targets per game, and Mike Evans is going to be out. This reminded me when I saw that. I was actually watching that game live when it happened, and Mike Evans, when it happened, I just got the Adam Thielen feeling all over again, where it was like he knew he hurt it, and he hurt it really bad. Like, it wasn't like a strain where he was just limping off a little bit. Like, he actually stopped and was shaking his head. You could tell he was pissed, and he's not playing. I honestly feel like you're without Mike Evans for the rest of the fantasy playoffs, which really does stink. O.J. Howard, the good news, I mean, while Darius Slay is good, he's a one-man guy. He's someone they're going to trust in man coverage all over the field. So if you get Chris Godwin in man coverage, he can win those matchups. The biggest concern for me here is Jameis Winston, because if Winston isn't okay, and because sometimes players in the middle of a game, they might feel like the adrenaline going and they're playing through it and all.
George Kittle, when he injured his ankle against the Cardinals, remember, he was out, he warmed up on the sidelines, he came back, he had a dominant game, and then he missed the next couple of weeks, right? That's exactly right.
Yep, and knowing they have nothing to play for at the Bucs, I mean, you're talking about a potential contract extension for Jameis Winston because he's pending free agent, but if Ryan Griffin is the starter for them, I mean, I don't want to play anybody.
Now, out of curiosity, if Winston gets through practice and he's good to go going in, I mean, there's obviously a chance. You've got a small fracture in your thumb. You get hit the wrong way, you're out of there immediately. If he practices and he's good to go, I assume you're still starting him against the Lions, right? Even with that risk of re-injury.
Yeah, probably. It just depends on who I'm choosing over. If it's between him and someone like Ryan Tannehill, I like Tannehill a lot this week. And then looking forward to Houston, I mean, I don't think that's a matchup I'm really going to be concerned about. So, I mean, there's going to be some added risk for sure. And we can't pretend that Winston didn't come with risks to begin with. So it's something that I'm going to have to evaluate kind of as we get more practice reports. But I would almost rather him sit out just so I didn't have to make that decision.
Yeah, that's always the way I kind of feel again. But, then every once in a while you have something like Dalvin Cook, who's like, no, I'm fine. And he comes in and he scores a touchdown and he plays normally. As for the Colts, Marlon Mack predictably cannot get anything going against the strong Bucs run defense, just 38 yards on the ground, but he does score his touchdown. Meanwhile, Zach Pascal continues to do well, absent T.Y. Hilton, 74 yards and a score. Marcus Johnson also finds the end zone. A real disappointing day, though, for Jack Doyle. 6 targets, 2 catches, 27 yards. They've got the Saints next week, then the Panthers. Let's assume T.Y. Hilton is down for the season, Tags. Who do you feel confident starting in this offense going forward?
I guess Pascal, just because I'm adding all this stuff up in my head, right? Because Pascal was someone that we trusted earlier in the season because T.Y. Hilton was out, and it was and he busted multiple times, and we kind of wrote him off. But now it's not just T.Y. Hilton. We have Eric Ebron, we have Chester Rogers. Obviously, Marlon Mack is somewhat limited in the passing game in terms of what he presented to begin with, and now with dealing with the hand injury, they don't want to give Nyheim Hines a bigger role for whatever reason. So I guess you can trust Zach Pascal on a weekly basis.
But you're still starting Marlon Mack, to be clear, right? I mean, I realize it's a tough matchup against the Saints, but I mean, assuming that he's healthy, you're still starting him each and every week, right?
Yeah, in a PPR format, Bobby and I had this conversation because I told him that Marlon Mack was an absolute disappointment this year. And he's like, what do you mean? He's like, the RB14. I'm like, he has been a disappointment. He's been a low-end RB2, high-end RB3 more often than not. So it's I don't want to sit here and say that he's a smash play every single week because I think he's finished as an RB1 twice all season. So I don't consider him an RB1. I consider him someone maybe a David Montgomery in that territory.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's not an RB1. But yeah, I agree. Dave Montgomery is a guy who, look, I don't think you feel all that great about starting him each and every week, but he's a guy you're just well, I'm starting him because he gets the volume and he's going to do enough and he'll find the end zone on occasion. So yeah, I agree with you there. All right, let's move on to our next game. Broncos 38, Texans 24. Tags, I feel like there is a whole parallel universe out there where the Broncos are leading the AFC West because I feel like they've lost so many games close and they randomly come up with these monster performances. But it's kind of a weird day here, Tags. I mean, you hear 38 points, you're like, great, Cortland Sutton went off, Phillip Lindsay went off. But no, I mean, Lindsay totals 55 yards, and he does find the end zone, but Sutton just 5 for 34 through the air. Drew Lock's 3 touchdown passes go to Noah Fant, who goes for 113 yards on 4 catches, Jeff Hireman, who catches an 8-yard touchdown pass, and Royce Freeman, who barely is involved at this point, but he does catch the touchdown. Fant left with a foot injury here. X-rays were negative. They get the Chiefs next. With Drew Lock running things, who are you trusting in this offense going forward?
Cortland Sutton, someone I'm still trusting. I'm still trusting Phillip Lindsay as well. The schedule upcoming, like Phillip Lindsay could be a league winner with the schedule they have upcoming, and like knowing that he's basically in like a 65-35 split now, where they're giving him the majority of work. But those are the two that I would trust. Noah Fant he only saw 4 targets in this game. It was really just terrible defense on the Texans' part.
Again, he left with an injury though, Tags. He was out for most of the game.
That foot injury. Now, do we know like what's going on with that injury?
All I saw are X-rays are negative. So, he may play next week, but it's up in the air. But as for now, it doesn't appear serious.
But foot injuries for pass catchers are terrible. And if he had to get X-rays, it tells me that it's not a great injury. So it might be like a mid-foot sprain or something like that. So I don't think I want to trust him as a streamer going forward.
All right, on the other side of the ball, bad real-life day for the Texans, but a good fantasy day. The game was over pretty early, but Deshaun Watson throws for a touchdown. He runs for 2 more. Will Fuller out here, so DeAndre Hopkins sees 13 targets, catching 7 of them for 120 yards and a score. Duke Johnson totals just 45 yards after that nice game last week. Carlos Hyde, 78 total yards, nothing too exciting. They're at the Titans next week, Tags. Are you starting anyone on this offense other than Watson and Hopkins?
I don't think so. I mean, Carlos Hyde, it's a really good game for him considering, but I don't know why the Texans, they tease us with Duke Johnson, and he played extremely well against the Patriots. I understand that was the way to attack them, but Duke Johnson's the more explosive player. Why not give him more touches? It kind of blows my mind, and you kind of have to worry about that every week because Carlos Hyde is what he is, and he's a plotter. I don't know. I'm not starting him with any confidence, I will say that.
No, you should not be starting either one of them. You just can't. I mean, I get Carlos Hyde, but essentially he needs a touchdown to have any value. There's almost no chance. I mean, there was that one game, maybe against the Jaguars, where he had a big game and didn't wind up scoring a touchdown, but
he should have scored, but he had the ball knocked out right at the goal line.
Yeah, I know exactly right. But other than that, he really doesn't get it done there. So in the end, I agree with you. Those are the only 2 guys. If you're forced to start Hyde in a league that's really deep and something like that, I could see it. But realistically, you want to avoid him. Jets 22, Dolphins 21. If you like field goals, you loved this game because there were 10 of them combined. No Le'Veon Bell for the Jets here, Tags. Bilal Powell gets 21 touches. He turns them into 88 yards. Not the worst game, not the best. Given the volume, Tags, are you starting Powell on Thursday against the Ravens if you assume Bell is out? I know it was a quote-unquote illness, but, we've talked about them wanting to kind of maybe start shutting him down a little bit. So assuming that Bell is out, are you starting Powell against the Ravens on a short week on Thursday?
No, not at all. This was a matter of I actually had Powell ranked higher than most people did this week because what was there not to like about the matchup? They were going to get 30 plus touches, the running backs against them. So even if you considered it a 50-50 timeshare, Bilal Powell was going to get some work against a bad defense. So it made sense in this one, but the Ravens, no, it doesn't make sense against them. That team is playing extremely well. They're the team to fear right now. And Bilal Powell isn't heavily involved in the passing game. He's splitting a lot of that work with Ty Montgomery. And I do expect Le'Veon Bell to play in this game. And even Le'Veon Bell is going to be like a middling to low end RB2 for me. So I would not be excited to play Bilal Powell.
You may not be excited to play Bilal Powell, but are you excited to play Robby Anderson, who had 7 catches for 116 yards and a touchdown? It's playoff time, Tags. That means it's Robby Anderson time. The last 4 games, 1 catch for 6 yards and a touchdown, 4 catches for 86 yards and a touchdown, 7 catches for 101 yards, and now 7 catches for 116 yards and a touchdown. Just the Ravens and the Steelers coming up. No big deal. Can you trust your playoff life to Robby Anderson?
That's the question, right? It's win or go home, and we've seen him legitimately ruin your fantasy weeks at times. And going over the last 5 weeks against the Ravens, the biggest games against them have been Robert Woods' line of 6 catches for 97 yards, no touchdown. He had 9 targets. DeAndre Hopkins, 7 catches for 80 yards, no touchdowns on 12 targets. So it's good that Robby Anderson has seen double-digit targets in back-to-back weeks. It helps that Ryan Griffin seemingly is not going to play in this game. It helps that Le'Veon Bell maybe taking a back seat. It helps that Jamison Crowder hasn't been playing very well. It helps that Demaryius Thomas is like 90, still trying to move around the field. But it all comes back to the matchup against the Ravens, and I don't particularly like it. I mean, he's going to be in like that low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4 territory due to the volume that he's seen the last couple weeks, but I am not going to forget that this is an Adam Gase coach team and that it is still the New York Jets against one of the best defenses in all of football, the Baltimore Ravens, and the Ravens opponents. I want to say the Ravens on the year, aren't they averaging like 57 plays per game? And then the Jets themselves average like, 57, 58 plays per game. So we're looking at very minimal volume for this offense, which it just makes me all sorts of concerned with Robby Anderson. You tell me, you're the Jets guy. Would you start Robby Anderson next week, like with any confidence at all?
First of all, do not call me the Jets guy, okay? It's not my fault. I was born in Queens, and then I have to root for the team, all right? That does not make me the Jets guy, but probably not. I mean, you know who I feel bad for, Tags? I feel bad for us, because the number of questions that we are going to get this week about who do you start in that wide receiver 3 spot, because you're going to have a guy like Robby Anderson who's going to be in the mix with all these various guys. And look, in the end, my guess, I have not looked at my week 15 rankings, but my guess for Robby Anderson is like 37. Like, that's what I guess. I'm going to be like, he's just outside wide receiver 3 range. I see a scenario where you start him, but he's not going to be, you mentioned with confidence. No, if I have to start Robby Anderson, it's going to be with zero confidence, but I may still start him. Look, he's getting the targets now for the most part. He showed a good chemistry last year with Sam Darnold. It's a terrible matchup. It is on Thursday, which makes me always kind of feel like, well, the defenses have a little less time to recover. The Ravens have played 2 kind of tough, banging out games here in a row. So I could see it, but man, with confidence, absolutely not. He's going to be a borderline wide receiver 3 for me, and I'm going to feel really dirty if I have to go and start him.
That sounds fair.
Yeah, for the Dolphins, Devontae Parker suffers a concussion here, which is really just stinks because he has been balling so hard lately. Albert Wilson also has a concussion, so who knows what Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to do next week if they're both out. But let's talk running backs here. Patrick Laird, Tags. A tough matchup for running back, the Jets. 15 for 48 on the ground, not great, but obviously he gets the volume. 4 catches for 38 yards, so you're looking at 86 total yards in a game. He doesn't find the end zone, but that's not terrible. 19 touches. Now he's got the Giants and the Bengals. That's a guy you probably start as a flex play, right?
Yeah, I do want to hear what they have to say about Zach Zenner. They did sign him. I don't even know if he was active for this game or not, but he didn't receive any touches, so I'm guessing not. Maybe another week in practice helps him get some touches, because Zach Zenner is probably the best running back on this team, and I know that's not saying much, but for now, I think we have to kind of say Laird. It's kind of like a Carlos Hyde type start where you don't necessarily feel great about it, but you know that he's going to get touches, and you just don't want to leave yourself with a giant 0 in your lineup and play someone that comes with a really extremely low floor. But I don't feel great about it. They're playing the Giants next week, and the Giants have been a team that I think it's ever since they got Leonard Williams last 4 weeks or something like that. They've allowed sub 2.6 yards per carry. They've been really good on the ground. So Laird's going to have to get it done through the air, and if Devontae Parker's out and Albert Wilson are out for that game with concussions, obviously it leads to more targets. So yeah, I would be pressed to say that he'd be in the flex territory, yes. Yeah,
especially in anything that gives you something for catches, right? A half PPR league, a full PPR league, because he is going to get involvement, and that's really what differentiates him from a guy like Carlos Hyde, is that he's going to be involved in the air. That's going to, certainly put him in the mix. So I'm inclined to agree with you. I could see a scenario where, I'm putting him in the starting lineup.
Is Allen Hurns a pickup, though?
He might be. It is something where I want to see, how Parker goes and how Wilson goes. But the thing is, I'm not looking to tie myself to the Dolphins. I'm not like, ooh, who can I go here? He's got, Fitz has nobody to throw to. Who can I get involved there? He could be Hurns. He had a decent game today, but it's probably, look, we'll have all week to talk about which crappy guy can I throw in my, borderline wide receiver 3 start. For now, let's keep moving to the Ravens 24, Bills 17. Even when his counting stats are not significant, Lamar Jackson knows how to produce for fantasy, just 145 yards passing, just 40 yards rushing, but he throws 3 touchdown passes. Mark Andrews leaves here with a contusion above his knee. This doesn't sound serious, but it is the short week, as we mentioned, with the Thursday game, so it would seem a little surprising if he's able to make it out there. Tags, you're obviously starting Jackson. You're starting Mark Ingram, who had 18 touches for 79 yards. And you're starting Mark Andrews if he plays. Is there anyone else on this team that you're starting? I mean, Hayden Hurst, he had 73 yards and a touchdown here with Andrews down. Are you starting anybody else here going forward on the offense?
Marquise Brown is interesting. I know he's over the last 2 weeks, he's actually has negative yardage, but the matchups have been pretty brutal, if I'm being honest. So I didn't expect much out of him in those games to begin with. But going against the Jets, you don't run the ball against them. On the year, they're allowing just 2.95 yards per carry. They've actually done a good job against quarterbacks too. If you look at the yards that they've allowed per carry to running backs, obviously they haven't played Lamar Jackson, so that should change. But if they have to go to the air a little bit, Marquise Brown can beat Darrell Roberts. He can beat Bless Austin. Those are the cornerbacks that they're trotting out there. Jamal Adams missed this game with an ankle sprain. I highly doubt that he's going to be ready to play on Thursday night. So, yeah, Marquise Brown is someone that I'm probably going to put in that wide receiver 4 territory as someone you can contemplate.
All right, for the Bills, look, we've talked about Josh Allen and John Brown a whole lot with these tough matchups. They both finally disappoint here. Allen just 146 yards with the touchdown. He has the lost fumble. Brown just 3 catches for 26 yards. Devin Singletary, though, 23 touches, 118 total yards. Cole Beasley catches the short touchdown pass. They're at the Steelers, then the Patriots. Who are we starting in those matchups from the Bills?
I was telling people that I would have sold Josh Allen before the trade deadline. We knew what his fantasy schedule was coming for the playoffs. Like, it was there was like not a worse schedule that you could draw up. Like, if you were to create the nightmare scenario for Josh Allen, they did it. The NFL did it during the fantasy playoffs. And it really sucks too, because he was playing extremely well, but he looked awful in this game. He was continually under pressure, which obviously didn't help, but he missed a lot of passes that he missed too. Like, you could see him, cursing himself out on the field. He averaged 3.7 yards per attempt. It was a brutal matchup. Look, but seeing him rush for 9 yards, that's the thing that you're supposed to have safety with when it comes to Josh Allen. You're supposed to be able to rely on him for a high floor. He didn't even give you that today, so it's really difficult for me to trust him. And then John Brown, he gets 8 targets, but again, these matchups are just so tough. And if Josh Allen's going to be off,
he hasn't put up impressive yardage totals lately, Tex. That's really the thing, right? He's been saving his days with, he had the touchdown, then he had the passing touchdown, right, against the Cowboys. So it's something where, yeah, I agree. I love Brown. I hate to say, he's getting the targets, but it is somebody at this point who depending on where you're at, you might have better options going forward. We're going to keep going with the recaps here in a second, but it is the end of Week 14, and you are still listening to our fantasy podcast. So hopefully that means that you found something that Bobby or Tags or I said useful this season. If so, it would be awesome if you took a minute and left us a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Any feedback, positive or negative, is useful in us continuing to make this something you guys enjoy and out of which you can take value. We read them all, so if you haven't yet, it'd be awesome if you take a minute and just leave us your honest feedback with a review. Let's move on here to the Chargers 45 and the Jaguars 10. Look, Phillip Rivers finally gets benched for Tyrod Taylor, but only because he was so darn good. 314 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 each to Austin Eckler. Mike Williams, who scores his first touchdown of the season, and Hunter Henry. Melvin Gordon gets in on the ground. They've got the Vikings and the Raiders on tap. The Jaguars defense might be the worst in football at this point. They've just totally quit. Any takeaways, though, in terms of what we can be thinking going forward with the offensive playmakers for the Chargers?
Yeah, kudos to Bobby for calling that. He said the Jags quit. I knew that they've really been struggling against the run, but even their secondary quit today. 330 yards passing on just 27 pass attempts. Woo! But I think we know who we're starting on the Chargers. We're starting Gordon. We're starting Eckler every week. Keenan Allen, you keep plugging him away. He's seeing the targets. Mike Williams, if he doesn't catch that one touchdown, it was like a 44-yard touchdown, if I'm not mistaken, that he caught in this one. If he doesn't catch that, we're looking at a major bust. And ever since they fired Ken Wisenhunt, there's been, I think, 3 games where he has seen 3 targets or less. So that's definitely concerning with him, where he's not a must play every single week. You kind of you have to look at scenarios where they're going to be throwing the ball quite a bit in order for him to get those targets, because Hunter Henry's involved, obviously Eckler's involved, Keenan Allen. So there's only so many targets to go around. So if you have a matchup where you don't think the Chargers are going to be throwing the ball a whole lot, Mike Williams is kind of in that wide receiver 4 territory.
For the Jaguars, it's just ugly all of it ugly. Gardner Minshew, 162 yards. He does throw 1 touchdown pass to Nick O'Leary. DJ Chark is your only receiver worth anything. He sees 10 targets, 9 catches for 75 yards. Leonard Fournette finally held in check. I mean, he does get 18 touches overall, but just 63 yards. Thoughts here on the Jaguars offense?
I mean, they kind of have these games every once in a while where they just totally get blown out, and then they go away from the run, and they promise you that they're going to come back and they're going to run Fournette the next week, and they do, and they're going to, and they have a good matchup next week. So they're playing Oakland, so they should be able to do that. Oakland's not blowing anybody out at this point. Josh Jacobs seems like he might be done for the year. So it should be a game for that. I think I would trust DJ Chark in. I would trust Leonard Fournette. Gardner Minshew is actually going to be a streaming option, and you can get into the conversation, is Chris Conley and D.D. Westbrook, are those guys worth like flyers? If you're like let's say you lost Mike Evans and you're looking for somebody off the waiver wire, Westbrook's probably owned, but Chris Conley, really disappointing. 3 targets. It's really difficult to trust him coming off that, because he was a guy that was seeing like basically 7 targets over the last month, like 7 targets per game. So I'll have to look at this one a little bit more, but I think there's going to be some appeal in week 15.
All right, moving on here to the Titans 42, Raiders 21. We talked about Tannehill already. I mean, he continues to play extremely well, 21 for 27 for 391 yards and 3 touchdowns. He does throw a pick. He also rushes for 19 yards. It's nice that he chips that in a little bit. Derrick Henry had kind of the weird game where he had 18 carries, 103 yards, and 2 touchdowns, but he left with a hamstring injury. He came back. But it doesn't sound like it's something that's completely nothing, like just a cramp. So it is something that you guys want to monitor. But really, the bigger story here is A.J. Brown. 7 targets, 5 catches, 153 yards, 2 touchdowns. Plus, he gets a rushing attempt for 13 yards. You mentioned it. They have Houston on tap. Not a great secondary. Are you starting A.J. Brown in your fantasy playoffs?
I think so. I mean, the guy, he's like a monster to bring down. Like, he's a big wide receiver, and it's kind of like reminiscent of like Anquan Bolden when he came into the league, where it's just like you just see so many people bouncing off him, and you're like, okay, he can't keep this up. He can't keep breaking tackles and finishing this, but he does it all the time. It's gotten to the point now where I'm just going to stop doubting it, because he keeps doing it every single week. And against Houston, it's a good matchup for wide receivers. He's clearly taken over the number 1 role over Corey Davis, and him and Ryan Tannehill they're only building chemistry, because you have to remember that they didn't have much reps together. A.J. Brown was dealing with a lot of injuries throughout the offseason. Tannehill obviously wasn't starting to start the year. They've kind of grown together in the offense, right? Like, A.J. Brown's role has grown as Tannehill has become the starter. I see no reason to doubt this duo going forward. Like, do you?
A little bit. I mean, I love Brown's talent, and I love the way Ryan Tannehill is playing right now, and he looks like he's their quarterback of the future. There was a report, today that they're looking to extend him and they're going to go forward with him, which I see no reason why they shouldn't. I like Brown, but he's a little bit of a guy who I wouldn't be surprised, even in a good matchup, if he randomly throws up a complete dud. Now, to be fair, you can basically say that about every wide receiver who's ranked outside of the top 24. So I'm thinking when you're putting him up against a guy like Robby Anderson.
I was about to say. Yeah.
First say, that's exactly right. Of course you are, Tags. You and I are like right there. I'm going with Brown. That's a guy where I'm going to go with Brown in the matchup. I feel confident enough in him. He's so talented, Tags. I really, really like him. But I've felt like I've said the same thing about Corey Davis for a while. But this right now, with the way he's playing, I'm not overly confident. I'm not like, yes, guaranteed, I'm putting him in. I'm going to feel great. I know I'm going to get a great thing. But yeah, at this point, when you're looking in that range, I think he's kind of the guy who's going to be a little bit at the top of it, as opposed to a guy like Anderson. On the other side of the ball, it's not great. Obviously, you mentioned Jacobs. He was apparently playing with a fractured shoulder. He was a late scratch, so who knows if he plays at this point. It sounds like it would be in their best interest not to. DeAndre Washington gets the bulk of the carries, 14 of them for 53 yards. He does find the end zone. Derek Carr throws for 2 touchdowns, but really nothing going on here on offense. Darren Waller does catch all 6 of his targets for 73 yards. Do you care about anybody on the Raiders going forward?
Well, obviously, if Josh Jacobs is out, DeAndre Washington is the clear-cut guy that you go to, and it's kind of like a Bilal Powell situation where you're not like really excited about it, but he's perfectly fine. Is like Patrick Laird. I think DeAndre Washington is a guy that got an unfair shake in terms of like not getting the opportunity to run with a starting job. Obviously, Josh Jacobs, that's his job, but DeAndre Washington could be playing himself into another contract, because if I'm not mistaken, this is the final year of his rookie deal. I could be wrong on that, but I'm kind of hoping for his sake that he kind of gets another job somewhere and gets to be involved a little bit more, because he was someone that people compared to Maurice Jones-Drew. I remember coming into the league, like he was a later round pick, but at the same time, he was that little bulky guy, but he could break some tackles. So he's someone I'd keep an eye on. Darren Waller, you're starting, but Tyrell Williams is the biggest disappointment for me in this game. Tyrell, like they were without Adoree Jackson, they were without Malcolm Butler. Like the Titans secondary was really struggling, like in terms of like to get bodies on the field, and to know that he can't get more than 4 targets or catch more than 3 balls for 35 yards in this matchup. Ew. Yeah, I don't know if you could ever play him with confidence.
Yeah, we're going to make it a Robby Anderson line, and we're going to say Tyrell Williams falls below the Robby Anderson line. That's how we're going to define it at this point going forward. Yeah, I agree. He's not somebody who you really want to be considering going forward. Chiefs 23, Patriots 16. I mean, the Chiefs win. They play well. But if you own any Chiefs playmaker, basically you're not all that happy right now. Not a great game fantasy-wise. Mahomes throws for 283 yards, just 1 touchdown to Mecole Hardman, who has 48-yard touchdown reception. That's his only target and catch of the game. On the ground, it's LaShawn McCoy seeing 11 carries for 39 yards, but really nothing going on there. Travis Kelce is your leading receiver with 66 yards, and he lost a fumble. Tyreek Hill, 62 yards. Sammy Watkins, 50 yards. It's a tough matchup, so any takeaways here from the Chiefs side of the ball?
What the heck is going on with the Chiefs running game? Like, how did we go from Andy Reid continually produces RB1 must-start studs every single week, even if it's a timeshare? So what? Like, that's supposed to hurt fantasy owners, but it should still be successful. I don't know what the hell happened to the Chiefs run game. Like, LaShawn McCoy, I mean, there's only Damian Williams has seen more than 13 touches in a game this year among that Kansas City backfield with all the injuries that have taken place. So it's clear this is going to be a timeshare no matter what. But before it was like, we have to find the must start. We have to find the guy that's going to get the most touches. And now I don't even know if we have to.
No, unless Damian Williams is in, I don't think you want any part of this backfield. I mean, look, Spencer Ware, who looks like he's running in mud, got 5 carries for 11 yards. Like they're not going to give McCoy the workload at this point to make him a guy who you can start. And so really the only one you want, assuming that he's fully healthy and not going to get injured, I would still go with Williams at this point. But other than that, I think you're totally avoiding at this point. And again, they were playing with the lead for the most part here. So you thought that they would be able to really kind of do well with the run, but they weren't. On the other side of the ball, it's just not pretty. Tags. After the game, Tom Brady had a giant wrap on his throwing elbow, so maybe it really is something that's bothering him. Just 169 yards with 1 touchdown to Julian Edelman, who does, see 12 targets, 8 catches for 95 yards. We talked about it a bit on the ground. Nothing doing. Michel, 5 carries for 8 yards. James White and Rex Burkhead also see some stuff, but other than that, nobody doing anything on the ground. I mean, and they're just not playing well. They're too raw. Jacoby Myers just not bringing in the ball when he needs to. Nothing's going on. Tags, what are you doing with the offensive players from the Pats at this point?
You play Julian Edelman every week. I mean, that's a given. He's the one guy that I think you could rely on consistently. James White has offered some consistency, particularly in PPR formats, but outside of that, I don't think anybody else is a must play. Sanu obviously is off the radar. I don't know if it's that ankle injury that's bothering him. Jacoby Myers is getting more snaps, but Tom Brady has been not good. I don't know if it's the elbow, man. Like, it sucks. I remember having the conversation about Peyton Manning when they were in the Super Bowl, and like just watching someone that we've watched for so long be so dominant, and then like get to a point where you wonder, like, I know people are going to take this the wrong way, but are they getting to the point where Tom Brady's not the best thing for the team? And like, if you've watched him over the last 2 months, you know what I'm talking about. And by the way, Patriots fans who booed him on the field today, that booed the Patriots, like, you guys can just, like, seriously, you guys should find another hobby, basically. Like, you should not like football anymore, because if you're booing that team that has won as many Super Bowls as they have, I don't think you guys are going to like what the future looks like. Like, you guys should be appreciating this entire thing. Like, it's almost like you're spoiled, as I was as a Bulls fan when I was younger. But I knew what I was losing when I lost it, and I would never boo the Jordan Bulls. But, I mean, Sony Michel, as I mentioned, going against the Bengals next week or whatever it is, and I don't even know if you could play him there, but it's
Julian Edelman, Tags. That's you said it. It's Julian Edelman.
It's crazy.
That is the only guy who you can start. I know, but that's what it is right now for whatever reason. Whether or not it's Brady playing, I mean, to be fair, look, the receivers he's throwing the ball to are pretty terrible right now. I mean, they have some talent, they can do something, but right now they're. The kids are too raw. They're dropping wells. They're probably running the wrong routes. He doesn't have much time to throw the ball at this point. The offensive line is getting pushed around a little bit. and he's 42 or however old he is. Like, eventually there's going to be a little bit of slippage. So for me, look, it's Edelman. And look, I couldn't hear anything in the game because my son was pretty much crying throughout it because he loves the Patriots so much. But if there was booing, I don't even know what to say to that. Come be a Jets fan for a day, and I would have cheered the effort that you saw today as one of the best games that my team had ever played. Let's move on to our final game here. Steelers 23, Cardinals 17. Duck Hodges, just 152 yards. He does throw the touchdown, who you mentioned, to Deontay Johnson, who has 6 catches for 60 yards and a touchdown. James Washington, after a few big games, kind of comes back down to earth. Does catch all 4 of his targets, but just 33 yards. Benny Snell, 16 carries for 41 yards, but he loses the fumble. Hopefully James Conner is on his way back. So who do you want to start here from the Steelers going forward, if anyone?
There's too much uncertainty. And I remember going back over a month ago where it was like James Washington was a guy that was on waiver wires. Deontay Johnson was the guy that you kind of thought about starting over Juju Smith-Schuster. And then Juju was coming back and, oh, now you want to start Juju. And then it was James Washington. It is never ending. It's a circus. And it's the same thing with the run game, right? Benny Snell is a guy that he got it done in some good matchups against some bad opponents. Now you're seeing Jalen Samuels getting mixed in with 7 carries. He continues to be terrible when running the ball. Kareth White getting carries. James Conner might come back. I don't want to tie myself to any. It's almost like the Jets, right? Where you feel like there's probably going to be someone on the team, especially in the wide receiver core, that's going to do something, but you don't want to bank on it. Like when we're in like win or go home time in fantasy playoffs, I don't think you could trust them. I wouldn't want to trust any of them.
Yeah, so I was kind of buying into the whole duck hunting thing for a little bit, but yeah, at this point, if you can't do it against the Cardinals, it's just something where I don't really love it at all. Kudos to them for sticking in the playoff race at this point, despite having very little offensively. But if I really want to tie the rest of my playoff lives to them, I really would try to avoid it. On the other side of the ball, we have a David Johnson sighting. I mean, it's only 5 touches, but he does score a touchdown on a catch. Totals 34 yards receiving, 19 yards rushing. Kenyon Drake still leads the way, 11 carries for 37 yards, plus 3 catches for 30 yards. Kyler Murray, not great. 3 interceptions. He does throw 2 touchdown passes, though, and Christian Kirk kind of gets back on track. 9 targets, 8 catches, 85 yards. Any takeaways here on the Cardinals side of the ball?
Christian Kirk overcame a tough matchup. Obviously, we know the targets are there, which is keeping him in wide receiver 3 territory, even if he's been relatively inefficient. But as for the running backs, you're starting to lose faith in everything because Kenyon Drake, while he did lead the team in touches, like the snap counts were 38, Drake, 21, David Johnson, 11 for Chase Edmonds. So they're involving all 3 running backs. And for a team that's struggling to run the ball to begin with, it's like you're starting to piece match this, and you really don't feel great about any of these guys. So unfortunately, I mean, we could be getting to the point where it's like, okay, do we choose Patrick Laird or do we choose Kenyon Drake? And that's unfortunately the territory it seems like we're getting to.
I think we probably choose Patrick Laird. I just want to be all in on Patrick Laird for 1 week of my life, but we can talk about that this week and, of course, recap it on Sunday's show. But that is going to do it for today's show. Thanks again to our sponsor, Manscaped. Remember, you need to look at everywhere, and you can with Manscaped's Perfect Package 2.0, and you can get 20% off plus free shipping when you use our code FantasyPros over at Manscaped.com. And thanks to Away for making me and Tags basically booking a trip just to be able to use our new suitcases. Remember, go to awaytravel.com/FantasyPros to learn more and order by the end of the day on December 15th to get free ground shipping with guaranteed free delivery by December 20th. Enjoy your Monday Night Football, everybody. Bobby and Tags are going to be with you for the rest of the week to get you through to Week 15.